All right, excellent. So I've just switched it on. We're live now, and yeah, I just read the intro on the Kickstarter page, but maybe you can talk a little bit about your background and your role in the production of Lords of Chaos.
Yeah, basically, I've been designing games since I was in seventh grade. So it's something I've always loved doing and built them for friends, have played them forever, kind of the classic build the games you want to play. I retired 6 years ago from running businesses, and I'd always told my friends, when I retire someday, I'll build these games and make them public. And so that's been the process. So Lords of Chaos itself, uh, started 37 years ago, believe it or not. And I've been running an active monthly campaign in it since. But finally publishing it for the rest of the world to see, I guess.
Excellent. Yeah. So I guess one of the things I was wondering, like, can you talk a little bit about your inspiration behind the game?
Yeah, I love role-playing games have a special place in my heart. I like strategy games as well, board games. But the thing I love about role-playing games is the fact that you're telling a collaborative story, right? And in fact, my opinion on the game master is the game master isn't the one telling the story, the players are. So I really love that storytelling element. But the games I was playing, especially in the fantasy world, and I like swords and magic and all that stuff is a lot of fun. And since the games I was playing didn't have all the features I wanted, the feel I wanted, I decided to make my own, which I think is a classic gamer path. But so that's what kind of led me on the path of I want to build the fantasy role playing game that I want to actually play.
Absolutely. I mean, I've definitely been there myself. I guess uh, prior to you striking out and like designing your own system, like, can you talk a bit about some of the stuff you used to play beforehand?
Oh boy, yeah, I've played as far as role playing games. Certainly the early version, basic D&D. Played that, but I played Gamma World, Top Secret, Boot Hill. Uh, you know, there's probably a bunch in there. Shadowrun. So I've played a lot of them. I know there's people who've played a lot more than I have. I tend to find one that I like and just run with it. Champions was an influence on this game. In fact, superhero. Game Champions was a nice influence. So I've played a lot of them, but I certainly wouldn't get into contest with someone who loves playing a different one every month.
Yeah, for sure. I guess in my limited experience, the only thing I've really touched is Dungeons and Dragons Fifth Edition. So I'm very much a latecomer to the whole like tabletop role playing scene.
Nice, yeah, yeah, and I think D&D has done an amazing job of building out content, for the game itself. But for me, D&D is still missing, and always was, missing certain elements that I like. And in fact, I think one of the interesting things about D&D is when it first came out, it was a very simple system. There was the weird THACO, which is gone now, but the way they calculated to hit, and there was all these other weird elements. But it was simple to play, and now D&D, and I play in fifth edition of campaigns, but it's grown complicated. So it has those mechanic bits that were clunky because they were easy, and then they've added complication on top of it. So you can enjoy any role playing game. I think if you have a good game master and a good group of people, the rules aren't as important. But certainly I think it's kind of a clunky rule system. Not meaning to insult any of the lovers out there. We all have the type of game we want to play.
Yeah, of course. But yes, indeed, Starkey, we are looking at the tabletop role-playing game Lords of Chaos. I'll drop the link in chat once more there. And if anyone has any questions along the line, please feel free to drop them in there, and I'll pass them along. But yeah, so maybe we can dig into some of those differences then. Like, if you say this is the game that you want to play, so what are some of those key mechanical differences?
I First of all, I want combat to be gritty. One of the issues I have with the progressive hit point systems is you when you get enough hit points, so you run around with 175 hit points, and you run into a creature that's going to do D8 plus 3 every time it hits you. It takes that fear out of combat, or it takes that respect out.
Hmm.
Combat should always be dangerous, even if you're experienced. Even if you're a hero, things can go wrong, and I like that grittiness. I also don't like artificial restrictions. Why can't a mage wear plate mail? Or a paladin can cast spells, but they can wear plate mail. So I don't like all those artificial restrictions. I think players can put them on themselves, or a game master who says, "In my world, here's some restrictions." But I like to give players the maximum opportunity to create. And in fact, the whole tagline for the game is basically, your vision and decisions matter. So I want your vision to matter when building a character and interacting with the world, and I want your decisions to matter in game. I don't want you to feel like, I'm going to roll once a round, I'm going to do about this amount of damage, I'm going to do that amount of damage in 12 rounds, this is going to be over. That's not very exciting to me. I want to be doing things in combat that I feel can affect the outcome of the actual combat itself, for example.
Nice. Yeah, I've definitely experienced some combat where early game no one can hit each other because we keep missing the AC threshold, and then late game you're just wailing on each other and whittling down the HP slowly over time. So
Right. Yeah, and I call that, D&D is an attritional combat system, right? So, to use the war game analogy, it's like World War One, and you're both in the opposite trenches, and you pound on each other. And like I said, you can usually kind of calculate, this is how many rounds this is going to last until it's over. And I just don't like that. And I once again, I don't like the fact that, I'm got a lot of hit points, so I don't even have to be worried for a little while. If someone gets a lucky shot, in real life, obviously getting a sword through the head is a bad thing. And if you're very experienced, you have ways to avoid that. That a rookie doesn't, but it's still dangerous. And I like having that, once again, that kind of respect for the combat.
yeah, okay, that sounds great. So maybe you can talk a little bit about like what is it like to create a character in Lords of Chaos?
The character creation is pretty easy. We have an automated spreadsheet with drag and drop menus for skills and weapons and such. So I like that aspect. Background, obviously, that's always free form. I don't have an assigned, make a roll and see whether you're, a peasant or a tradesman or something. But as far as the mechanical bits of skills and weapons, there's list of combat skills, there's list of non-combat skills, and you go in there and select the ones that basically work for your character. So you can kind of peruse through the book and kind of pull up skills. You can just use the drop down menu. And then it's basically a point buy system. So you have a certain number of, I call them fame points, basically experience points, and you allocate those in the manner that you wish among the different skills, and then those skills will be expressed as a percentage. So you have a certain percentage under normal conditions to be successful when utilizing that skill.
All right, yeah. So that's what you're talking about, where you say that like the players really get to construct their own characters. They aren't just picking a class from a list and then they have the sort of like fixed or limited skills that that class is sort of baked in with.
Yeah, because I've run into this in D&D, and I don't know if you have, where say I want to play a thief-like character, but I don't want to pick lock, right? And I don't
Hmm.
I don't want to have climb, and I want a different skill set, and yet a lot of games define that skill set. And just like I use an example in the rules, and I think in the Kickstarter, if you want to be a mage and wield a two-handed sword, why shouldn't you be able to? Now you need the strength to do that. If you're the very low strength mage, you may not be effective with a two-handed sword. But why should I restrict the vision of what the player wants to do? And in fact, that's something I thought was interesting in the rules. There was a few times over the years where I would kind of say, well, I don't want mages to be common, so I'm going to put some extra restrictions on them. And then those rules would suddenly turn into kind of messing up the balance somewhere else. And then I was tweaking those. And it finally occurred to me, I'm actually ruining the rules trying to put restrictions on, which is what this game is not supposed to be about, where I'm going to write the rules in a more generic, right? Always go to the most generic case. And then I can put those restrictions on as a game master. And in fact, I run different kinds of campaigns. My last campaign, I took my players back to basically the Bronze Age, And so they didn't have heavy armor available. Magic was much more primitive, so I put a bunch of restrictions on magic. So we can always put restrictions on top of things, but in general, I wanted it to be the player can come up with a vision. The only thing that the player shouldn't be able to do is unbalance it, right? So you don't want the player who, basically everyone else is just a showpiece for why they go in and wipe out everyone. So as long as it fits within the balance, why not let the players do, what their vision is?
Right. So very like your goal is rules as written. The system is balanced. The different abilities and skills the player can pick are like make a decent amount of sense relative to their point buy cost. But then it's up to you as the GM to impose whatever restrictions you want to say on like these skills are not available, these weapon types or these armor types or these spells are not available. But that doesn't unbalance the game just because some things are taken off the table.
Right. And in fact, when you take a skill, there's four learning categories for that skill. So there's easy, average, hard, and very hard. And so one of the ways a game master can kind of affect that balance a little bit is to say, I'm taking this weapon that's technically a hard weapon and I'm going to make it easy, not probably easy, but maybe take it average for your character. And so that gives them a bonus, maybe for some reason from where they came from or their story. So you have that flexibility, and then it allows the game master to kind of control. Once again, this is based on vision, not necessarily balance, but
Mm-hmm.
kind of control the feel for the game that they want, of maybe making magic say harder. If they want a lower magic system, lower level magic system, you could add some restrictions on that make it more difficult for players to use. But if you don't want that, then there's no reason to impose it.
Gotcha. Yeah. So then, what is the sort of typical role for the GM like? Is it similar to other sort of tabletop games where they're like drafting up a campaign and NPCs and like how does the like the GM edition of the game work as a tool to assist the actual person running it?
Yeah, I mean, it is the game master is the game master, so it's the same thing. I know people. There's people who do one-offs. I've never done one-offs. I like to run campaigns, so that's it. I kind of set, plot arcs, story arcs, if you will. I set the environment. I set up NPCs, and then I let the characters loose within that. And in fact, I don't even expect them to follow. I'm always really clear with my characters, my players. If you don't want to follow this arc that's out there, if you don't want to follow this, clue you don't have to, just do what you want to do. So that's basically it. Of once again, I think that the game master as kind of an adjudicator of the rules and setting the environment and then letting the players tell the story. And so I see my job as a game master is to facilitate that, right? To make it as easy as possible for the players themselves to tell the story. And that's one of the things I like about Lords of Chaos with a percentile system. If you have a 50% chance to climb a wall, for example, I don't have to sit there and explain to a new player who's never played a role playing game what that means, because most people understand those percentages pretty intuitively. Just like they'd understand if like this wall is covered with moss and slick, so it's minus 10% or minus 20%. Okay, 50 minus 10, 40%. So those are the kind of things as the game master is just facilitating that game. And I think, having done this for a very long time, that when you let players loose like that and give them freedom, they tell amazing stories. I mean, just incredible stories. And that's one of the things I think is special about role playing. You don't talk about war games very often that you played 30 years ago, but we have stories within our group that we're still telling of, oh, remember that thing back, in college 37 years ago, and so did this. Oh, that was hilarious. We still talk about some of those things. And what other kind of game uh, system do you find that in?
Yeah, absolutely. So the yeah, you touched a little bit on it there. Like it's the roles are based on percentages. So is that the way that like roles in the way that a like Dungeons and Dragons is the analogy I'm gonna be drawing from here because it's the system I'm most familiar with. But that often involves like player says I want to do this, and then the dungeon master in that case will say like okay just make a dex roll or make a roll related to some skill that is on the character sheet that is probably like generally going to encompass what the player is trying to do. Um, in the case of Lords of Chaos, is it more granular than that? Like, does the GM just say like, what you're trying to do is probably this chance of succeeding. So just give me a roll based on that, and then they can allow the characters like strengths or weaknesses to factor into that.
Yeah, I think that will depend on the game master. I think the rules themselves, and I think this is true in D&D as well, in that there's two levels to me. There's the I have the skill in this. So let's use climb wall for a second, just as an
Sure.
example. So I have the climb wall skill, so I am practiced for some reason or experienced in climbing the wall. But if a character runs up and doesn't have the climb wall experience, I don't want to say, "Oh, do you have climb wall?" And they say, "No." I'm like, "Well, then there's no way you can climb a wall, right? That would be ridiculous." So, so I go first to, do they have the skill itself? If they don't, what seems appropriate for climb wall? So perhaps a dexterity check. So make them roll a dexterity check at a minus of some sort for the fact they have no skill. So that way it lets the narrative flow continue as far as the player wants to do something, as long as it's reasonable. So that's always my philosophy as well. As long as the player is trying to do something that based on their character, it would be reasonable. Like you couldn't jump a 100-foot gap as a human, right? There's no human that can jump 100 feet. So that's not reasonable. But if they say I want to climb a wall, or I want to lift this big rock, or I want to paddle a boat and I've never paddled a boat, let them do that. No skill, then pick a primary attribute, which in my system primary attributes are basically that strength, dex, constitution, and have them roll against that at some kind of minus.
Okay. Yeah. So the maybe we can talk a little bit about the Kickstarter campaign itself. So that just wrapped up relatively recently, right? Like on February 10th?
Yeah, that sounds familiar. I lose track of time fast. Yeah, it's been about a week. So
Yeah, wow. So overall, how did you find, like, how did the Kickstarter go? Like, has this met your expectations, exceeded, fallen short? How do you think that it
yeah,
stacked up?
yeah, it exceeded. One thing that I talk about, um, I'm used to running businesses. I still do business consulting and coaching, and I really enjoy it. And when I talk to someone who wants to run a project, and since I've spent the last 6 years working hard in the game business, I always ask people if it's a commercial or a vanity project, right?
Mhm.
In a commercial project, if you're not going to do marketing, it's not a commercial project, right? You may want it to be a commercial project. So, so if you do a vanity project, which can be, I just want to learn something, I just have this cool thing I want to create, and you always hope people will play that, right? But that kind of lets you off the hook for going out and do the marketing. So, this is a vanity project for me. I'm playing the game, I'm going to play it till I can't. But I wanted the challenge of, professional editing and working with the artist and getting professional art and layout and just all that stuff. So, I have to admit to a little bit of imposter syndrome. When I went to set the amount for the Kickstarter, I'm like, oh man, you know, I want to set it low. I don't want it too high. Um, and I don't want friends trying to bail me out because I have good friends. So I said, well, I'll set it for $300. Uh, and hopefully I can get that. And even a part of my brain was like, well, are you going to hit 300? I don't know. But truthfully, if I had to put a number on it, I would say hitting $1,000 was pretty exciting to me. Of like, okay, $1,000, I'm gonna use that to buy art with. That'll be really cool. And we ended up over 4,000, and I'm very surprised. I mean, my marketing consisted of, I'm on about 50 Discord servers. I felt 10 of those were communities that I contributed to, so I felt comfortable dropping a link. So I dropped the link on about 10 Kickstarters, put it on my personal Facebook page, and then with about 48 hours left, I think dropped the link on 5 of the most active of those Discords, and that was it. So certainly very pleased with the results, and once again, all the money's going to pay for cool stuff. So I'm excited to be buying cool stuff.
Yeah, so I guess in a sense that with this campaign, like you already had the system built out, but this was just sort of like taking all of your work on this project and packaging it into the PDF with the fancy art. And then there's the GM edition as well. And what are the other stuff? What are the other things that people could get here?
Yeah, well,
See.
the GM edition is, basically I wanted to keep it simple, particularly since this is my first Kickstarter. And in fact, I'm thinking of, and I probably will write up my experience, right, which is anecdotal because it's one person's experience. But if it helps
Mhm.
others, I'm happy to share stats and what's worked and hasn't worked. So the thought was, my research kind of showed, don't put a lot of rewards in there, right? Five at the most. I didn't want to make it complicated. I'm an old infantry guy, so you'll give me a rifle and shovel, otherwise I get confused. So I'm like, okay, I don't want any extra rewards. Like I've backed Kickstarters where I've gotten sweatshirts and posters and stuff. It's like I want to just give the stuff that people are going to use. So basically, the Kickstarter was you're going to get the rule book, which is to play the character, how to GM, all that. You're going to get a starter module, which I've run through as a player. It's really fun. A friend built it. And then the GM edition was for people who are like, I want to run this game, but maybe I'm gonna have questions, right? And I'm gonna be available for basic questions. But what I did with the GM edition is said, I will play in your game as a player, or I will run the game as a GM for up to 4 hours, and then we'll do a 1 hour after action review afterwards, right? And basically kind of go through rules questions and how it went. So I thought that was an opportunity, and I was very happy. 9 people took advantage of that. So I'm excited to go out there and either play. I suspect I'll be game mastering, but I'm happy to play too, and take notes. As a designer or coach during that to discuss with the person who purchased that level when we're done.
Nice. So, is this? Would you consider this still be like an ongoing process of development? Like, are you going to be creating more content for the system as time goes on? Do you ever foresee like doing another campaign? I know it's this one's just wrapped up, but like down the line, is this still an evolving project?
Yeah, this project is going to go on, like I said, until I can't do it. I mean, I love playing the game. I played it a long time, and I've not got bored with it. I've never gotten close to bored with it. So what I'm really hoping to do, I do have some other projects and some other games, but my desire with this game, and I plan on continuing to run my monthly campaign, um, is if the community wants something. So one of the questions I have, and I don't know the answer to this yet, is I had 114 backers, right? Some of those are friends, who are throwing in some money. Some of those are people I've helped out on Discords, probably throwing in some money. There's going to be a certain percentage you just put it on a shelf and go cool, or maybe use it to take rules out of and say, here's a cool mechanic. I'm going to take it and put it in my game and power to you. So at the end of that funnel, if you will, we get to the bottom of here's people who want to run campaigns. So for me, if I've got people out there running games and they're coming to me and saying, "Hey, we'd really like to see X," my plan is to go out and make X. I've got decades of material on this stuff. I've got a wiki that I just kind of threw up there and have been posting stuff, but so I can post background material for people who want to run things in the world. I can post, I plan on keeping adding creatures to the bestiary. So there's just there's a whole world out there to do, and I'm happy to do that for people who are actually interested in running games in it.
All right, fantastic. So, if anyone has any questions in chat, I think now is a great time to ask them. But in the meantime, where can people find you on social media? And do you have any of those other projects that you'd like to plug or talk about?
Yeah, on social media, the only I have my website, House Chaos Games, and Discord, and you can find the Discord link, through the House Chaos Games website. So once again, with that, keeping with simplicity, I like to keep it very simple. I am active in the Discord, so when people pop in and ask questions, I'm generally available. And other than that, I do have other projects coming, but those are down the road. I've got a Space 4X that'll be a web-based Space 4X. So of course you go from a tabletop role-playing game to a web-based Space 4X. That's not the best business strategy, but I'd run for friends for about 5 years long ago, and I told them I'd rebuild it at some point, and a few other projects, including I've been approached by some people to maybe work on some games with them since the Kickstarter. So who knows what projects will come of this, and coincidentally also, not coincidentally, I'm writing a business book because of the consulting stuff I do. I say things to clients who always say, "Oh, that's really amazing," and it's business 101, but most people haven't done business 101. So, I've been mentoring people in the game business and such, and I thought, well, I'll write this book and get it out into the world, and that way, people who are designing games who want to have commercial projects, this will be practical guide. It won't be a guide on, hey, here's how to, do you want an LLC or a sole proprietorship or whatever. This will be, let's get in there and roll up our sleeves and actually make things happen.
Yeah, significant difference between doing games as a hobby versus doing games as a business. So I think that's going to be a very valuable resource.
Yeah, I think it's exciting, and I think it'll be very helpful because once again it'll be simple. In fact, it's probably technically a booklet. It's not going to be a super tome or anything. It's going to be something. Here's the simple things that I've found. Pick and choose the things that seem interesting to you or seem that it'll work for you, and try it, and hopefully it'll work.
All right. So would you be able to share a link to the website you mentioned? I don't know if it's on the Kickstarter page. I've been kind of looking around for it, but
Yeah, it is at the bottom.
oh, here we go. House
Yeah,
Chaos Games. Found it.
yeah.
So make sure to share that in the chat as well. All right, and then I guess is there anything we want to conclude on? Any closing thoughts?
No, I appreciate you having me on. It is a game I love. I think that one of the things we've found, it's been tested forever, so that's fairly certain. So I think for people who like that kind of little grittier point build, kind of your decisions in vision kind of matter. I think this is a game I'd encourage you to check out. One thing I will mention that we didn't talk about, I think it's very easy being a player in this system. I've had multiple people come in and basically have never played a role-playing game and sit down and build a character and come in and play. I will say for the game master, it's helpful to prep ahead of time. When it has a specific hit location, for example. There's a segmented combat system. So there's some things that if you're the kind of, I like to show up as a game master, whip open the book and kind of run a scenario. I don't think that's necessarily the best idea. So I think the load on players is really low. I think the load on the game masters a little higher when you're tracking combats. It's not as complicated as D&D with all, for instance, D&D has feats and you have, I still get this with people who played forever. I'm trying to take a bonus action. No, you don't have a bonus action. Then what can I do? Here's your regular. We don't have any of that complication. With segments, it takes a certain amount of segments to do something, and when you can't do anything else that's completed. So that makes it fairly simple. Or you can do very few things, I should say, not anything else. So definitely, I do have combat trackers and stuff I use as game masters. So those are resources also I'm going to put out there for free just for people to use. And they've been honed for a while. They're not pretty. I'm not good at making things pretty, which is why I hired an artist, for the book as well. But they're functional, so that's the important part for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Have you thought about digitizing the rule set in, say, Tabletop Simulator?
I have not. That has been suggested. So I'm not sure what that entails. The problem with being a solo dev basically is you've got a project list, much longer than you'll ever get through. So that's about the priorities to me, and that's I've had some people make comments of are you going to add this or add that, and my comment to anyone who is asking that is, hey, if you have something you want, tell me, because if multiple people want it, I'll consider it, right? Because I want to support the community, and if it's something that makes the community more robust, I'm happy to do it.
Yeah, that sounds great. I just know that anytime a rule set can be digitized, like I've only played a handful of in-person sessions of D&D, but I've played tons of hours in an online system for D&D, and that anytime there's an opportunity for people to connect digitally, especially as we're still coming off the tail end of the pandemic, that it's really nice to be able to connect over large distances as well, if there's a digital tool set for that.
Yeah, and one of the things I'd always run it as a tabletop game, right? So around the table, currently I'm running 10 players. I've run up to 14. I may have even hit 15 at one point, which I know is crazy. I didn't know any better, right? It was like a boy raised by wolves. It's like, oh, you're not supposed to run that many. But when the pandemic hit, I thought, oh my goodness, right? Like we've played this game for decades. What are we going to do? And is Lords of Chaos kind of executable remote? And I wasn't really sure, and I found out through necessity that it really worked well. And in fact, Mike Cook, who's the guy who wrote the module, he's written some books in the world of Lords of Chaos, and he's running a campaign himself. he's running it completely remote, and so he's using basically Photoshop for maps, and we're running it on Discord. We're running it on the Fact of House Chaos Games channel, Discord, and so it's very doable within that. Just some way to post maps, and he puts tokens on the map and such, and moves them. So I think with Tabletop Simulator, I guess you'd be able to move your own token, but
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's sort of one of the strengths of the system that if more of the impetus and the sort of the weight of the it's shifted onto the GM, then it means that the one person who's streaming it out to everyone, if they're sort of responsible for keeping track of everything, then the players don't have to worry about it quite so much.
Right, right. Yeah, and I used, I didn't think that Lords of Chaos would be necessarily good at theater of the mind, right? So I like the tactical map. Some of that positioning can matter, but I actually played, particularly the first year of the pandemic. I did a lot of the theater of the mind, and then I would just throw up a basic, you're on the left, this person's on the right. Here's the three people in the middle, and here's the two mages standing behind. And just had them describe what are your actions, and kind of went from there. So I think it really depends on how you want to run your game. I think the Lords of Chaos combat system really appeals to that kind of that war gamer of, I'm in this hex moving to that hex, and I'm doing this, and I'm trying to push my opponent, or I'm fending my opponent, or using some of the combat tactics. But you can do it in other ways, and so once again, I'm not sure how many people are going to actually run active campaigns. And I know most people, even when they run campaigns, they may run them for a year or whatever, and then move to the next rule system. So we'll see. We'll see what kind of community we end up supporting.
Absolutely. Well, that all sounds great. Randy, thank you so much for joining me on the call today and talking through Lords of Chaos.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
All right. Well, we're going to wrap things up there, but I wish you the best of luck in your future endeavors, and I'd love to see where this goes.
All right. Well, thank you very much. So will I.
All right. Have a good evening. Bye bye.
Take care.